4 words, post-lunch food coma.
Great.
Hi, Marnie.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but
Let me get set up here so I don't kill myself. How's it going?
it's going well. Hoping everybody stays awake.
Oh, nice. I thought we could kick things off with you basically telling us a little bit about yourself, your background. Elida Beauty, what is it? How did it come about? Portfolio brands. Just run with it.
So Elida Beauty is Elida, not Elida, just so everybody knows that I had to figure that out when I first started working for them. But yeah, my name is Marnie Steffe. I'm very happy to be here. And I'm the Director of Insights and Innovation for Elida Beauty. That essentially is the Director of Research for Elida Beauty, in other words. My Elida Beauty, for those of you who don't know what it is essentially kind of a company within a company at Unilever. I have worked with Unilever for 14 years, started there in 2007. But Elida Beauty is essentially a subset of brands within the company in the personal care division. And what they basically did was they took actually brands that were, in a sense, lower importance in their category and hadn't received a lot of, let's say, corporate support from Unilever, and put them all together in a portfolio of brands called Elida Beauty. And the reason they did that was because there's an acknowledgement that the brands that are in the portfolio have a lot of potential. They have a lot of potential for growth, but they hadn't necessarily been the top priority in their respective categories. So these are household names that most of you will know fairly well. Brands like Q-tips, Noxzema, Caress, Pond's, St. Ives. So probably brands that you're aware of and that you have used or do use, but brands that you might not have heard a lot from in the last 10 to 15 years in terms of communication and innovation. And so my role as the Director of Research there is to do research across these brands and categories for North America on the entire marketing funnel. So essentially everything from strategy, branding, proposition, to innovations and communications, through to performance and market. So that's my role within Elida Beauty.
So in terms of timing, you're a little bit over a year into it at this point?
I joined in December of last year. Yeah.
So how's it going? You share with us, no pressure. Some of the bright spots, maybe some of the challenges that you faced so far to date?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Elida Beauty is, for me, a very new kind of role. It's a role that, in a sense, you look at some of the challenges that we have as part of Unilever. Unilever is a huge global organization. We are kind of operating like a startup within the company. And so in terms of the bright spots, everybody that's joined Elida is extremely passionate about the brands and the potential for the brands and the potential for growth in the future. So and I think one of the things that really makes it special is it's a really tight-knit community. So whereas like me as a research director, for example, I might not in previous roles have had much connection with, say, supply chain or finance or some of the cross-functional teams. It's a very tight-knit community where we're all aware of kind of the challenges that we're facing and also the kind of exciting potential for the brands. So that's one of the things that to me kind of drew me to the company. In terms of challenges, certainly we're still in a spot where we need to work with we're very, I'd say, stretched in a sense, stretched from a personal perspective, from a resourcing perspective. So I am the only research person that we have full time across the brands in North America, and stretched for budgets. Budgets are tight, so we have to make our dollars work really hard for us, and that's across the board. That's with research dollars, marketing dollars, media dollars. So some of those are the things that we're kind of looking at in terms of, it's a really exciting space to be working at. It's a very big business challenge because our brands, even though many of them are household names, you haven't probably seen or heard from them much in the past 10 to 15 years. So there is a level of, let's say, equity challenge that we're up against where we really do need to bring these brands, kind of the vision of the company is refounding iconic brands. That's really what we're trying to do.
So budgets and resources stretched pretty thin.
Yeah.
You have to make your resources and budgets work harder, certainly with the limited ones that you have.
Yeah.
Tell us some of the approaches that you've been taking so far to meet those challenges. And really, I think the critical role you were describing this, when we prepped, that research is playing in your day-to-day to really, sort of overcome those challenges.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of talk today about insights and the importance of insights. So my role is insights, and it's insights through and through the marketing funnel. I think one of the things that's really special about Elida is that from the leadership down, I was talking to somebody before about Steve Schumacher. He's our leader in North America. Our CEO as well, John Laurent. He is, both of them, as well as everybody through the marketing organization, are really, they will ask if you're a brand manager and you are presenting a new product concept, they will say, where's your consumer evidence? I want to see it and I want to hear it. And so there's a push, or I guess an excitement to have those consumer insights throughout the entire funnel, and for everybody to be getting as deep as possible on their own, in addition to, let's say, using me as a resource. So one of the things that we're doing actually as a research in my function and research is we're taking an online qualitative platform. It's like it gives you overnight qualitative research. We have trained our entire marketing team in it. So the expectation is that if you're a brand manager, if you're a brand associate, if you're a brand director, you have been trained in this platform. You're using this platform on a regular basis. It's a video platform. You get video feedback from consumers overnight, sometimes in a couple of days. So the expectation there is really like, go in, use it as frequently as possible. You can use it for anything from, if you have a question, just generally broadly about, for example, what are consumers thinking about their economic conditions right now? Or you can put a product concept in front of them and get feedback that way. You can put communications idea or a claim statement in front and get communications that way. So it really kind of helps direct and get very quick and agile. So like from an agility and entrepreneurial perspective, we're using that platform as much as we possibly can. And then I think the second thing that's really important, particularly important for this conversation, is we're trying to really build our cultural fluency. So from my perspective, obviously I'm a Caucasian woman. Sometimes I think I should have been born as a Hispanic woman because I was a Spanish major and I worked for a Hispanic advertising agency for 7 years. And I've done a bunch of Hispanic marketing at Unilever. But I feel like I'm trying to help the team build a cultural fluency where we're using our own team to learn from our own team, because we have a very diverse team at Elida, but also bringing in outside expertise. From my perspective, it's also using research agencies that have an expertise where I might be lacking that expertise, and trying to build our cultural fluency with whatever group of consumers that may be important, because some of our brands, for example, have a strength with the Hispanic market or with the Black market. And so we're trying to learn from everything we know and learn the why behind it, and then really build on that as we move forward.
So what kind of insights and learnings to date have you gathered to be able to provide the folks in the room here with your expert advice? And really, I guess I'm talking about the elements and inputs that, can help folks based on your own experience. And then, lastly, I think, we've talked a lot about authenticity in each of the sessions. It's been a big word. And you were just describing this and touching on it, at least. Any of the cultural nuances that you're sort of discovering along the way?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I mean, one of the things that I think, and this is something that I started doing when I was in my role at kind of corporate headquarters in Unilever, was working on getting underneath the granularity of the consumer insights. So for example, we might be able to say, we're going to target on the Caress brand, for example, which has a point of strength among the Hispanic consumer in the US. We might say we're going to target Hispanic women 25 to 54. That group is very large, and has a ton of nuances underneath it. So you could be talking to a bilingual, millennial, Hispanic mom who's a kind of a younger millennial age, and she has a very different life than, let's say, maybe an older millennial Hispanic mom who's a rising star in a corporation, which may be very different from, a bilingual Hispanic single person who's just starting out in the corporate world or just starting a job. So one of the things that we're trying to build at Unilever and at Elida is just kind of, I guess I call it maybe going beyond the basics or getting underneath the surface and getting to a level of granularity, so that when you're building innovations and you're creating innovations or you're creating a communications campaign, you can kind of start to see the threads of things that are most important to consumers and which things are different for different people and which things might be the same. So I think it's really important to get really underneath the surface. And that's one of the things that, for example, with that platform I was talking about, we're really trying to have almost like a democratization of learning. So people can go into that platform at any point in time. They can kind of choose the consumer groups they want to talk to. They can ask the questions they want to talk to, but the expectation is that learning is continuous. And then on my end, I'm trying to just make sure that we are building that fluency on a regular basis. The other thing I would say is what I think is important to know is, or that it's very hard to do, but maybe is quite important, is when you're targeting a particular group, is having them in mind when you're starting the project. So if you're starting a new product concept, if you're starting a new communications campaign, it's like building it from the ground up as opposed to it being any sort of afterthought. So like, for example, there was a project that I worked on in about a year ago where we were doing a corporate campaign for Unilever, and it was for Hispanic Heritage Month. And we worked directly with a Hispanic agency. We did our qualitative research up front. We learned about, we dug underneath the values in the community, but in a way that we could then see how they were going to apply to the campaign. So then when we got to the campaign ideas, it was, okay, another round of qualitative, because we want to make sure that along the way, so not only are you building it from the ground up with the insights, but you're tweaking and learning as you go forward, and making sure that from start to finish, you're getting the right insights and you're getting the right executions at the end of the day.
Right. It's an ongoing process, and really speaks to optimizations, at a certain level. I guess you've piqued my interest. Are there any use cases or case studies of actual campaigns that you can share with us?
So I'd say at Elida, we're still in the process of building those. Honestly, like we're just starting the process of building some of our campaigns out. One of the things that we are doing, though, is essentially talking, as we're building campaigns for certain consumer groups, we are talking to them on a regular basis. So, for example, an interesting learning that we found on one of our, not even on our campaigns, but just as we're like looking at the brand and the proposition of the brand, we found that certain groups will look at one of our brands and say, oh, that brand is really kind of a little bit older or a little bit dated. And it's kind of like, it's almost a negative for certain groups of people, but then for other groups of people, it's a positive. And it's like, oh, I remember that brand because it was in my grandmother's bathroom and I've got such positive memories of it. And so you take that as a nuance of what's old and negative to one is old and really positive to another. And so those are the kinds of things that they're quite tweaked nuances that you can kind of build on to make sure that you're getting to the right, as we in Elida are building these brands back up from having been not having a lot of support. We need to make sure that they're relevant for the brands are relevant for the benefits and the needs of today's consumers, but that we're understanding where there's similarities and differences along the way. So from an Elida perspective, we're still building those. From a Unilever perspective, like I said, I had a campaign that we worked on last year, and it was celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and it was kind of highlighting a number of our different brands, but in a way that really brought to life some of the interesting nuances of the Hispanic community. It was highlighting business, entrepreneurial business owners. It was highlighting, in some cases, culturally relevant foods that people were eating. So it was really, but we built it from really the ground up in terms of the insight. So it was, to me, a really important step to take to make sure that we're, getting to the right place. I could give you other cases that are outside of Elida or Unilever, but those are some that come to mind.
No, I think that's great. And as we look to 2023 and just, I guess the future in general, are you very optimistic or apprehensive of what is sort of your temperature right now?
I'm very optimistic. I think, one of the things that when I talk about getting underneath the surface, I think one of the things that I think quite hard to do, but important to do from a research perspective, from a marketing perspective, is to try to put yourself as much as possible in, and we always talk about consumer shoes, right? But actually doing consumer shoes can be quite difficult. So for example, it was like a week ago or so, I downloaded the Discord app. And I don't know how to use Discord, but my daughter does. And I was like, you're going to have to show me how to use this because I don't know how to use it. But I was kind of consciously thinking, okay, I have to learn what she's doing in order to be relevant to her. She's building games in Roblox. I don't know how to do that necessarily. So from the same perspective, I think we all need to put ourselves in those shoes. So if I'm marketing, I'm not a Black woman in the US, but do I need to understand that experience as best I can? Yes, absolutely. Because otherwise I can't market to that person appropriately, and so I need to be talking to people that are in those experiences. I'm not a Hispanic woman in the US, but I have my own experiences that I can bring to the table. So I think there's a need to really understand and put yourself there as much as possible. And I think one of the big things about that is knowing that you have to be uncomfortable doing that. If you are not uncomfortable doing it, you're probably not doing it the right way. Like you may not be learning enough, because unless you are actually that target audience, if you are that target audience, then I think you probably have a much easier time marketing. But so many of us are not in the audiences that we're targeting, and we really need to get underneath the surface of what they're doing. And really just like, maybe it's an hour a week, maybe it's not just this consistent thing, but it's time spent really doing things that are a little uncomfortable for us.
No, I think that's great advice and insight and wisdom. Unless you have anything else you want to bestow upon us in the way of your own experience and some guidance and advice you can provide. Otherwise, I'll throw it out to Q&A.
Yeah, I know you asked about some other examples. I think, sometimes I think of different examples that I've seen of brands that do, for example, like in my case, I'm thinking Hispanic communications quite well. This might seem like an odd one, but I oftentimes refer to McDonald's. There's a number of different campaigns that they have, and I always think of this one. It's called Tío Roberto. And it's a really, it's a few years old, but it really sometimes brings to life to me how well you can do the cultural nuance, because it's all about this teenage boy, and his mom drops him off with his uncle, and the teenage boy doesn't really speak any Spanish, but the uncle speaks almost only Spanish. And the mom is like, I got to go to work, see you later. And she's fluent in both. And you see these scenes first of this boy who's playing on his iPhone, and the uncle's like, what are you doing? And then you see the uncle working on a project, and he has asked the boy to pass him a screwdriver in Spanish. And so the boy's like, what are you doing? And then you see them in the car going to McDonald's, and the guy, the kid says, Uncle, you have to go derecho. or he said derecha, derecha, which means right. And the uncle's like, no, derecho, derecho, because there's an E or an A. So derecho is straight and derecha is right. So the boy was getting the one letter wrong and giving his uncle the wrong direction. So, and then you finally see them sitting in a McDonald's and they're eating fries together. And so it brings the whole product experience together. So I think, like, I always sometimes refer to that as an example of, there's really interesting cultural nuances around the language, the play on language, the generational impact, and how generations live in this country very differently. And just there's an emotionality to it that's really connects very well. So just as like an example, if anybody wants to look it up, but they do generally tend to do a pretty good job.
And to be mindful of the sensitivities
Yeah.
as well, and the opposite end. So I think this has been great. Your experiences, I think, wonderful. I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. I think we can open it right up. I'm sure you guys all have questions or right off the bat.
Hi, Marnie. What do you see as the future of research? Because especially for those of us in CPG, like it's typically like these rounds of quals and quants and focus groups, and that takes a long time, right? And I think we've all seen during the pandemic, we have to adapt very quickly, be able to pivot. So as we look to options to expedite like research options, what do you see as the future?
So I mean, that the platform I was talking to you about, to me, is a good example of that. We can generally get research overnight from that platform. So, you put your questions in, it's like 5 questions, you put them in, you get answers the next day. I guess part of what I see is that those kinds of platforms, or even things where you're employing a little bit more of like, dare I say directional, but I think we do have to move faster. Like, I mean, I used to work 10 years ago on, very long basis tests that took 3 or 4 months. And we don't really do that anymore, or we only do it if it's, the risk is so high that you have to do it. Otherwise, it's a lot of directional or very quick understanding, and then you keep moving. So, and then when I talk about that platform, and I talk about like, if we have certain new product ideas and we go in and we just do a quick overnight, we can get some really interesting information that allows us to kind of move on and get to the next piece of it. So I think it's just going to get faster and faster. I mean, you can't get much faster than overnight, to be honest. We don't do everything overnight, but I've moved already from things that take 6 months or 3 months. So I think whatever used to take 6 months should now take 3 months. Whatever used to take 3 months should now take a month. And whatever used to take a month should now take a week. So you almost kind of keep condensing it. But I would say that if you forego it altogether, you're going to miss. So I wouldn't forego it. I mean, forego it if it's absolutely like you know what you're doing, but don't forego it if you're not sure.
Hi, I'm Allie from Danone. I would love your thoughts on how you get from more of like a functional insight, specifically on a product that you're trying to deliver on, and that emotional insight that's going to unlock something like the McDonald's commercial you're talking about. So I feel like sometimes there's a huge gap between the two.
Yep.
I'm looking for more of like an emotional tie to a product, or even about someone's life and how they live, so that we can make some spots and really make sure the brand is grounded in that, from that emotional high ground. And it's sometimes I just feel like I'm missing some of that. So I would love to hear how you get to that point, or how you uncover those insights beyond just like basics, I guess.
So I guess what I would say is I think there does need to be some investment in time and energy to understand. So you're taking essentially maybe the broader human truth, and you're trying to connect it to a product truth. And those things, just for something to really be successful, they both have to come to life. So I would say, to me, the continuous learning on the end consumer, so whoever your consumer target might be, the way I think about it, and it depends on your budgets and your time and things like that, is I think there does need to be an investment of time or money or both in actually understanding the cultural nuances, whether it's a generation or an ethnicity. And that can be done through a lot of different venues. I mean, you can do that through very specific primary research where you're recruiting people and you're talking to them, but you're not necessarily talking to them about the product. You got to start with talking to them about their life. And I mean, one of the things that I'd say is often missed is oftentimes research dollars go directly to a brand and a category, and they don't go to that broader, like, I need to understand you as a person, and I need to understand your background and your experiences. And when you miss that part and putting at least some of your money and your time into that piece of it, it's going to be really hard to connect the product and the human truth, because you're going to be missing the human element of it. So I think you have to do the investment in time there and potentially money. Not all the time, but I think if you do that a few times, then it's going back to that piece that I was saying before, like getting underneath the surface and getting to the granular pieces of things. So I think about it in terms of, when was the last time you were at a dinner party and you met somebody for the first time and they just asked you question after question after question after question, and they really got underneath the surface of you as a person? Personally, and when I go to a dinner party and I meet somebody for the first time, it's usually like that surface level conversation. Hey, how are you? Where are you from? How many kids do you have? And sometimes you don't get to that second layer, and very, very oftentimes you never get to that third or fourth layer. But I think that's where you start to uncover when you get underneath the layers is when you start to uncover the real truths. But it takes time and it takes some money.
Hi, Marnie.
Hello.
I'm Monica Bernalis from Cody. I think I have a question with regard to recruitment, because I think one of the challenges that we're seeing is that when we look at studies and we look at Gen Pop, like the multicultural representation is low, right? Like we're not able to get, often what I'm seeing, we're not able to get a sizable base to be able to draw conclusions or even understand that consumer, that cohort. So I'm just curious to understand if there's anything that you're exploring or looking at to help with that gap that we're seeing in the research process, especially if we are interested in really understanding more of the multicultural consumers.
Yeah. So dare I say, it does sometimes go back to time and money. A lot of the studies that we do at Elida, or we were doing at Unilever, if we're doing something for, again, a communications campaign or a new product concept, we will do boosts of consumer groups. So if we're trying to go after, if our target is a core Gen X target or a core Black woman or Black or Hispanic woman, we will make sure that there's readable sample sizes in our research. It does, because those audiences in the US are smaller in numbers, it does sometimes cost a little more to do that. But again, to me, that goes back to, it's a critical piece if you really want to get it right. Because what I've sometimes found in the research is that when you are looking across different groups, it's like saying, if you go across different generations, the one product, or in my case, for like a body wash, a fragrance for a Gen Xer is going to be different from a fragrance from a person that a Gen Z or maybe even a boomer would want. So, but there are times when those things will line up and that you've got kind of a broad base appeal, but there are some times when they're not going to line up. And then you have to understand and decide where those differences and similarities lie, but you do have to actually recruit them and speak to them directly. And oftentimes with like a readable sample size or something in a quant type test, or if it's quality, you need to make sure your sample is mixed enough that you're talking to those people. Like in our case in Elida, when we use this overnight platform, oftentimes we're saying if a certain brand has a certain target, that's who they're talking to on the platform, and they're talking to them on a regular basis.
Hi,
Hi.
Gina again, from Danone. A question for you in terms of how you use your research and data and insights to stay 5 steps ahead of the consumer, because what they're telling you today
Yeah.
helps you today, but it doesn't help you for kind of future, whether it's innovation or just cultural insights. Do you use, like there are predictive culture agencies out there or semiotics groups that can kind of lean into what those trends are kind of moving towards, so you can help align, whether it's the brand, whether it's the consumer insights, with kind of what's going to happen to be ahead, rather than kind of reacting to what's happening now, which by the time you get in market actually ends up putting you behind.
Yeah, I mean, it's so future facing is always hard, right? You don't know exactly what the future is going to hold. But yes, so in Elida, I'd say it just depends on the nature of the project or the question. We are kind of continuously looking at trends in the market. We do have some agencies that we work with that are kind of more AI based, or really kind of macro future facing trends. So we and Unilever and Elida, together. We oftentimes look at like macro trends, and those will be things that we look at, that are 3 to 5 years out kind of thing. So we do work with some agencies that bring that in on a regular basis to us. It's always a balance of where we put the time and resource. Because to me anyway, I think we need to know that, and we need to know the trends, and we need to know where we're going. But also at Elida, we also have to focus on really building, to some degree, building back to a point of growth. So we may or may not be leaders in the category until we get to a point of, we've built the brands, we've refounded the brands back to kind of current relevancy in today's market. So there's a balance there in Elida, in the broader corporate Unilever structure, that yes, we see those on a very, very regular basis. We use a couple of different agencies to bring them in.